In this video, we're going to talk about one of my favorite subjects. I call this the power of story. Story, the ability to tell the right story at the right time for the right reasons, underlies the entire entrepreneurial selling process. We tell stories all the time. Right when we meet someone in lead generation, we might tell it in determining fit. We might even tell a story in a proposal or a resetting expectations conversation, and we certainly tell stories to customers as we onboard them into our businesses and we develop relationships with them. So this is a tool that we're using all the time. One of the things I would love to have you consider as we go through this together is, what do you bring to your interactions with your potential customers and your customers? And I know that's a strange question, but here's what I'm getting at. I think we often have our default behaviors and things that we bring. We bring agendas, we bring materials, we bring brochures, we might put a bunch of stuff on our website. All of that stuff is great. But here's what we know. What we know about story is that it is one of the most powerful tools of influence that we have as human beings. I'm going to say that again because that's really important. This is one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful, tool of influence that we and you have as a human being when it comes to communicating, when it comes to building businesses, and when it comes to selling. And so I want to talk about, why is this true? What is the research showing us around the power of story, and how do we get really good at this? Let's first talk about the problem. So the problem as I see it is, and this may be a surprising way to frame the problem, but here we are, you and I are awash in information. And there's information coming at us from all kinds of different streams. There's the traditional forms, there's radio and TV and other people. Obviously, this is a form of information right here. There's books and magazines and all those sorts of things. And then there's all the new digitally enabled forms of information that are coming at us through our iPads and our smartphones and our laptops and our devices. And not to mention all of the social networks that we work in, LinkedIn, Google+, Facebook, Twitter, all of these sorts of things. And these are incredible productivity tools. But they also open up, each and every one of them open up channels and vast amounts of information that are coming at us. If you stop and think about that for a second, I'm presenting that as a problem. And I don't mean to suggest that these technologies and these channels aren't amazing. They're great, and I love them. Love experimenting with them. The problem I'm pointing out is we continually gain more access to more and more information. And the question is, when you're interacting with people, are you adding more information, more noise to the channel, or are you helping people make meaning out of that information? And one of the ways I say this, it may be goofy, but one of the ways I say this is, here's you're surrounded by all this information, here's your mom. Think about this for a second. Your mom, when she was your age, had a certain amounts of channels of information, all the traditional forms, radio, TV, telephone, other people. But yet here we are, we've got all these digitally enabled forms of information. And what's interesting about that is how fast it's changed just in one generation. The idea here, folks, is the question we should be asking ourselves when it comes to communicating with people and selling and building businesses is, how am I cutting through all this noise? How am I reaching people and making meaning out of this information? One of the reasons we need to talk about this problem is that it begs an important question. What do you give up when you get another device or another social network or another channel of information? Because we do give something up. If you were not checking Facebook yesterday because you didn't know it exists, and you're checking it today, you had to have given something up to make room for that. And what is most often true is people say, I give up time, focus, or attention, and personal interaction. Guys, that's a problem. That should scare you, right? Time, interaction, personal interaction, and focus. Those are very, very important things to the sales challenge. They're very, very, very important things to entrepreneurs as we're building businesses. So the thought here is, how do we add that meaning back? In that time that we have left when we're interacting with people that is not distracted, not defocused, how do we add back meaning to those? Well, we have a couple of options, and I'm going to distill it down to its components. We can add more facts to that interaction, or we can tell a story. And let me read a quote to you and just reflect on this quote for a second. This is a quote from Annette Simmons, who's a really interesting person who studies the impact of different forms of information on people's decision making. What Annette Simmons says, and this is a quote, Facts are neutral until human beings add their own meaning to those facts. The meaning they add to facts depends on their current story. People stick with their story even when presented with facts that don't fit. They simply interpret or discount those facts to fit their story. This is why facts are not terribly useful in influencing others." End quote. Think about that for a second. People stick with their story even when presented with facts that don't fit? It's a very provocative quote. It's one I like very much because guess what? The research suggests that Annette Simmons is exactly right. When we walk into a room and we're trying to influence people, what we often do is we access our educations or just our backgrounds and we gather up all of our facts and evidence and we walk in that room and we say, here it is, here's all the convincing facts. And what's very provocative about this is people like Annette Simmons and lots of other researchers are suggesting that that, in fact, is not as influential as the ability to tell a good story. What I say is telling the right story at the right time for the right reasons. In 1997, 3 researchers, 2 women and a man, walked into the Carnegie Mellon Undergrad Student Center at the Undergraduate Student Center at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, here in the United States. And they were looking at the impact the impact on fact versus story on our communications. And they did a very clever and tricky experiment where they said to the undergraduate students, these are 18 to 22-year-olds, they said, folks, we're very interested in how you use technology. You young people use technology in such an interesting way. We want to do a survey of how you use technology, and we're going to march you down to this separate room, and we're going to administer this survey, and it'll take 6 or 8 minutes of your time, and for your trouble, we'll give you $5. So all these students thinking, hey, I got $5 for 6 minutes worth of time? That's easy. And they went down, they took the survey, and 2 friends walking out of that experiment would say to each other, hey, did you take that survey just now? And the other friend says, yeah, I was in the same room with you. And they're both holding an envelope with $5. And one student says to the other, did you give any money to Rokia and Save the Children? And the other student says, holding that envelope with $5, I gave some money to Save the Children, but I don't understand what you're saying. Rokia, who's Rokia? And the one student says, well, in my envelope with my $5, there was a pledge form from Save the Children. And it said, in Malawi, Africa, there's a little girl who's 9 years old called Rokia, and she's dying of a waterborne illness. It's entirely treatable, et cetera, Save the Children. And I just gave them some money. And the other student says, well, that's interesting because in my envelope with my $5, there was also a pledge form from Save the Children. But my pledge form said, in Malawi, Africa, on an annual basis, there are 9 million cases of waterborne illness. There are 11 million cases of malaria, et cetera, Save the Children. So I gave some money too. Folks, this was not an experiment about technology at all. That was a ruse. That was cover for the actual research on the impact of fact versus story in decision making. And the results are pretty astounding. The fact-based pledge, 9 million people, 11 million people, et cetera, that fact-based pledge yielded, on average, $1.14 of donation. The story of the 9-year-old girl, Rokia, yielded $2.38 on average, more than double. So the question for us is, why does that happen? And by the way, this happens in all kinds of different research, in all kinds of different domains, happens every time. What is happening here is that stories are doing 2 things that facts do not do. They add context and they connect to emotion. And folks, this is what animates decision making. What this means is, think about that for a second. What this means is you are twice as powerful with the right story, more than twice as powerful with the right story in any situation as you are with the facts. What this does not mean is ignore the facts. I'm not suggesting that we all run from here and just tell stories and never have any facts. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we need to be great storytellers. We need to be able to look people in the eye and choose the right story for that situation, for that particular decision, for that solution at the right time. Because we animate people's emotions, they can feel it, not think it, they can feel it. You can feel how scary it is to be Rokia. And everyone in this world can picture a 9-year-old girl. But it's very hard to have feelings around 20 million people. It takes the context away and it dampens the emotion. We do this every day in our communications. We overload people with facts and we undertell stories. And this part of the course is really an attempt to rebalance that and to recognize that stories are at least twice as powerful as facts. You've got to have them. That's the power of story.